Thank you for listening to the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast, hosted by Kari. The views and opinions expressed here are strictly those of the person who gave them. Take what you like and leave the rest. These views and opinions do not represent any specific 12-step program, only my experience, strength, and hope in recovering from the dis-ease of addiction and codependency. If you'd like to learn more, please visit my website at www.luminousrecoveryyoga.com. Hello, my friend. Thank you for joining me for the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. I'm so happy to share this space with you. Really, it's just a space for me to share my experience, strength, and hope, stuff that I'm learning in both my yoga practice and my recovery practice, and just bring this to you as an offering, something that maybe you can think about in your own life or see how this applies to you today. And if you're not in recovery or you don't do yoga and you still find yourself listening to this practice, maybe it will inspire something in you to try one of those things. You don't have to be in recovery in order to enjoy this podcast, and you don't have to be a yoga practitioner. But it does maybe require a little bit of curiosity about yourself and just a little bit of introspective thinking. And really what you take is up to you. As we say, take what you like and leave the rest. So today I have a topic that I want to bring to you. But before I do, I want to say, if you have not joined me for a Yoga of 12-Step Recovery meeting, it's something that I offer every week, Thursday evenings, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And it's half meeting, half yoga practice. Every week I bring a topic to the group. We share on that topic, we discuss it. You can share if you feel comfortable, if you feel inspired to share, always permission to just show up and listen and be exactly as you are. And then after we share, we move into a gentle yoga practice that incorporates that topic into the practice. I like to think of this as an opportunity to embody these different principles and to see how they work inside of us, in our bodies, and how they can really hold ground for us so that when we go out into the world, we can practice these things off the mat. So that's my offering to you. You can sign up for Y12SR or Yoga of 12-Step Recovery by following the link in the description or the show notes, depending on if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to this as a podcast. Either way, I would really love it if you were curious and joined and just tried something different. So with that being said, let's jump into our topic for today. So, today I want to bring you an idea that I've been rolling around in my head, and it's not, I don't want to say it's not brilliant, but it's something that I've been thinking about, and that is the idea of slogans and mantras. So for the last year plus, I have been studying Sanskrit, which is a fascinating language. And I would say not only have I learned more about Sanskrit, but it's also taught me a lot more about English, which is interesting. Learning a new language has actually helped me learn my own language, my primary language, a little bit better, because I'm learning about concepts of language like participles and, brushing up on my adjectives and compounds and all of the different parts of language. And I find it really interesting to be delving into an ancient Indo-European language. And Sanskrit actually has a lot of some of the origins of language. You can trace words in English back to Sanskrit words. Like, for instance, the word for mother is mater, right? Like, there are things that actually really parallel between English language and Sanskrit. And what's interesting is that, yoga is so big in our culture that, even clothing brands like prana, right? Like, that's a Sanskrit word that means life force energy, but it's also been used as a brand for clothes. So, there's lots of different ways where you can see Sanskrit popping up into pop culture and popping up into just, different parts of our culture and society. So, while some may say it's a dead language, what that actually means, dead language, is that it's no longer used colloquially, meaning it's not used in everyday language. And an interesting thing about that is that colloquial language actually changes, right? It changes a lot. Think about how much we use abbreviations these days. And, maybe 10, 15 years ago, we didn't use abbreviations the way we do, like FML or WTF, right? Like, we use abbreviations a lot. And maybe that's a millennial thing. I don't know. And so colloquial language changes. As people change, as culture changes, so does our language. The interesting thing about Sanskrit being a dead language, and I'm putting that in quotes, is that it hasn't changed. It has actually remained the same throughout the course of time. So because of that, we're able to look at texts and different pieces of writing that were created thousands of years ago and still able to read and decipher those texts today because the language has been preserved as it is, which is really fascinating. And it really allows us to go back and look at these ancient texts. And honestly, what we see oftentimes is that people were struggling with the same stuff that we struggle with today. And so it's fascinating to look at a text that's thousands of years old and see that the human condition has actually really stayed the same, that we still have the same struggles as our thousands-year-old counterpart humans. And I think that's really interesting, like the human condition is the human condition. We struggle, we suffer, we overthink, and you could find a lot of these different things in Sanskrit texts where they're talking about these same human conditions. So it's really fascinating, having dipped into Sanskrit, to really see that humans actually have not changed that much. Like, certainly things have changed, but also a lot has not changed. So that is one thing that I've really enjoyed about getting to learn the language of Sanskrit and then also be introduced to different Sanskrit texts. So what I want to talk about today are slogans and mantras. So slogans, if you are in recovery, if you're in the rooms of recovery, if you're familiar at all with, recovery stuff, then you may have heard different slogans. So some different slogans might be stinkin' thinkin' or keep coming back. What are some other slogans? How important is it? Or by the grace of God, there go I. There are just these different slogans that we use that, consider when you are in a moment of crisis, that we're not going to remember probably some of the deeper self-help ideas, right? And so when you're in a moment of crisis, sometimes it's a short, repeatable phrase that you could say to yourself that will help to reorganize your thinking. So one of my favorite slogans is, what other people think of me is none of my business. That's something that if I'm kind of in a mental spiral about what other people are thinking, if I had to lay down a boundary, or if something happened where I'm really concerned about how I'm being perceived by others, sometimes I can remember in a pinch, what other people think of me is none of my business. And I will say that to myself over and over and over again. And even if you're not in the rooms of recovery, certainly you might have different short phrases that you say to yourself over and over again. We might also call these affirmations, right? It's something that affirms your existence in the here, in the now. It's something that is meant to get you sort of thinking in a way that is less destructive or maybe more focused. So think about slogans as also affirmations, things that we say to ourselves in a moment to help maybe reconnect ourselves to our bodies, to the present, and hopefully to avoid some of the spinny outy, spirally obsessive thinking that, as the human condition, most of us are prone to. So slogans and affirmations are really just these tools that help us stay present and help keep our thinking focused. And I use slogans all the time. Same with affirmations. These are things that I do and say to myself in order to avoid some of my negative or kind of sticky, slippery thinking. So, maybe you can think of a slogan or an affirmation that you use regularly, or something that you say to yourself that brings you back to the present moment, especially when you've kind of walked out of the room, mentally anyway. So I want to pair that with mantras. Mantras, and you've heard maybe this word before, a mantra is very similar. It's something that it's a short phrase. Oftentimes, not always, but mantras can be in Sanskrit or in a different language. And that helps to, again, presence the body to the moment. So let me think, a mantra could be, what's that mantra that I hear people use a lot? Sat Nam. Sat Nam. or, just short Sanskrit phrases that folks might use as a call to God or something that connects you to God in the present moment. So what I think is really interesting, and this is where I want to draw a parallel, is that the Sanskrit word mantra, and this is what I'm going to tell you, the way it breaks down, the word man, M-A-N, man, comes from the word manas, which means to think. Man means to think. Tra, so the second half of that word, mantra, T-R-A, tra, is a suffix. So a suffix goes on the end of a word. A suffix that, when added to a word, means an instrument for. Tra means an instrument for. So when you put that together, man and tra, what you get is an instrument for thinking. Like, that is the literal translation of what mantra means. It's an instrument for thinking. Man means mind or thought or to think, and tra means an instrument for. So mantra is an instrument for thinking. When I learned this, I feel like my brain exploded. I thought this was the most brilliant thing. Mantra is an instrument for thinking. It is an instrument or a tool that helps to reshape our thinking. It helps to reshape our thought. So a mantra is something that we can use in the moment that helps to hone in or sharpen our thinking, like a tool, right? Like any tool, a hammer, a screwdriver, right? A knife, like the tools that we use to create new things or to build things or to shift things, right? So mantra, an instrument for thinking. So this totally exploded my brain, because when I thought about mantras and I thought about slogans or affirmations, the same thing applies. It's an instrument for our thinking. It is a tool that we can use in the moment that helps to shift our thinking. And this works so well for me to think about that slogans and affirmations and even mantras are things that keep me focused in the present moment, especially when I am prone to have my thinking sort of turn on me, whether that's, negative thinking or obsessive thinking or thinking in loops. I remember when I first started working a 12-step program, I would get really obsessive in my thoughts, and I could not stop from thinking the same thing over and over and over again. And usually it was a resentment, or usually it was like some self-pity thing. It wasn't an empowering thought per se. It was something that was sort of keeping me really focused on my anger or on what I was not happy with. And so my sponsor taught me that, one, to write it down. So first, by writing down that resentment, that anger, that obsessive thought, I was anchoring that thought onto paper, which meant that I could sort of get it out of my mind and onto paper. So that would work for me. I would write it down. And then when that thought would continue to recur, I would say to myself, and this is what my sponsor taught me, I would say to myself, we've already made a note of that. We've already made a note of that. So every time my mind would want to spur up that thought or would want to keep looping that same obsession, I would say, we've already made a note of that. And that would just really settle me down. Like, I can't even tell you how much that would help. And so that was the mantra, that was the slogan or the affirmation. We have already made a note of that. And every time those thoughts would come up, I would say that to myself. And then, it was like the assurance that if I needed to revisit that resentment or I needed to remember what I was angry about later, I could always revisit what I had written down on paper. But for the present moment, I could let my mind settle knowing that we had already made a note of that. This is not a new thought. This is something we have already considered. Thank you very much, self. I honor what you were thinking, and we have already made a note of that. So that is how slogans and mantras and affirmations help me in the moment, is they sort of help me anchor my thoughts. They help me anchor maybe where I'm drifting into obsession or, where my thinking is just kind of becoming distorted. And so I'm really pleased at the idea to sort of be affirmed that a mantra is an instrument for thinking. It is a tool that I can use in the moment that helps anchor my body to presence. It helps anchor my thinking so that I don't drift off into dissociation or obsession or some of the things that my mind wants to do and spin out when I'm stressed or I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you haven't heard my episode on HALT, I did that one several episodes ago. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. That's another slogan, right? These are instruments for thinking that help me in a moment when I am stressed or I am just not fully able to, presence myself, that a slogan, a mantra, an affirmation is an instrument for thinking that helps me to get right here, that helps me to get present. So that is what I offer you today. And what slogans, mantras, or affirmations work for you? And how can you really strategically see that slogan, affirmation, or mantra as an instrument for your thinking so that when your thinking becomes distorted or obsessive or it walks out on you, that you can call yourself back to the present moment through simple words or phrases that will help you to presence, to ground, to calm, and just to feel like you are driving the bus and not that obsession or distorted thought. So I offer that to you today, mantras, an instrument for thinking. And hopefully that helps you. Hopefully that, makes you think about what instruments for thinking you're using. And sometimes we can use those instruments for evil, just like we can use our superpowers for evil. I think that words, thoughts, and phrases can be used to help and assist in our recovery. And, when I say recovery, what I really think about that is that recovery is calling my spirit back. It's calling myself back from all of the different places where I can tend to lose myself, whether that's relationships or substances or even, past experiences. I find that sometimes my spirit, it feels like it's scattered all over the place. And so for me, recovery is the practice and the act of making myself whole again, making myself a whole, complete person. So, I think that we all have something we're recovering from. We all have some past relationship or, a past experience, a trauma, something that, maybe severed us, maybe left us sort of in the dust a little bit. So I really believe that there's always opportunity to come back to ourselves, to come home to ourselves, to the present moment, because really everything is happening in the present moment. We don't exist in the past and we don't exist in the future. We only exist right now. So mantras are a tool to help anchor us into the here and now. So I hope that helps. I hope that's something as an offering that I can bring to you today. And if that, works for you, as we say in the 12-step rooms, take what you like and leave the rest. So with that being said, we're going to move into our yoga practice and we're going to use a really simple mantra today. And when we get over to the mat, I'll tell you what that mantra is, but we'll use that mantra as just something to say to ourselves in the pose as a way to presence and anchor us into the present moment. Now, you can say this thing in your head or you can say it out loud. It really just depends on where you are and if it feels safe or comfortable to actually use your voice to say this thing out loud. Mantras can happen in our head and mantras can happen orally, vocally, so that we can hear it and maybe take it in a new way. So you can decide if this is something you want to say out loud or something you want to just say in your head. You choose. And with that being said, I'll meet you on the mat. Hello, my friend. Thank you for joining me for this simple yet powerful yoga practice today. Today, the theme of our practice is mantra, an instrument for thinking. Slogans, affirmations, all of these things work to keep us anchored into the present moment. We're going to use a very simple affirmation today. I am love. In each and every pose, we'll say this to ourselves. And as I said, you can say this in your head or you can say it out loud, depending on if it feels safe and if you're in a place where you can say this to yourself out loud. So it really just depends on you and what you need today. We'll keep this practice short and simple, but in each and every pose, we say the mantra, I am love. Let's begin on our back. And we'll start in supine butterfly. Lie down. Bring the soles of your feet to touch. Place one hand over your heart and one hand over your belly. Take a breath. And settle your body into the present moment. And say to yourself, either out loud or in your head, I am love. I am love. Lengthen your legs forward. Take your arms over your head. Take a big full body stretch. And say to yourself, I am love. Pull your knees to your chest. Open your arms into a T. Drop your knees to the right. And turn your gaze to the left. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable. And say the mantra, I am love. You can say it once or you can say it over and over to yourself. You decide what it looks like. I am love. Pull your knees back to the center. Roll your knees to the left. And turn your gaze to the right. I am love. And gently pull your knees back to the center. Come up to a seat. And then make your way to all fours, a tabletop position. Drop your belly, lift your chin and your chest up to the ceiling, cow pose, and say the mantra, I am love. And push the floor away, round your upper back, tuck your chin to your chest, cat pose. I am love. Continue to move your body through a few more rounds of cat-cow. And say the mantra to yourself. I am love. And say it as many times as you like, as loud or as soft as you choose. Continue to focus on the words. And these words are an anchor to the present moment. Come back to a neutral tabletop position. Take a big breath in. Downward facing dog. Lift your tailbone to the sky. Pedal your legs out, bend your knees, sway your hips from side to side. I am love. And settle into the pose with your mantra. I am love. Pick your heels up, bend your knees, look forward, step to the top of your mat. Halfway lift. I am love. Forward fold into ragdoll pose. Catch your elbows. Open up your feet hip width or wider. And let your head fall. If it's comfortable, close your eyes and say the mantra. I am love. Release your elbows. Place your hands on your hips. Press down and rise up. Reach your arms up over your head. High mountain pose. Look up at your fingers. I am love. Take a big breath in. Pull your palms to touch at the center of your chest. Close your eyes if that's comfortable. And say the mantra to yourself. I am love. Say it 2 more times. I am love. I am love. And drop your arms by your sides. Lift your shoulders up to your ears. Roll them down your back. And just stand here for a moment and notice how you feel. You don't have to do anything or change anything about yourself. Just notice. I am love. Bring your palms to touch at the center of your chest. And then pull your thumbs to the center of your forehead and bow your head towards your heart. In honor of you and me and our practice, I bow to you, dear friend, and say namaste. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. I hope you heard something today that is helpful to you, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you for listening to the Luminous Recovery Yoga Podcast. If you'd like to support the show, please consider joining my Patreon or leaving a comment and review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or YouTube.